Yeah. Oh, and if anyone doesn't want to see themselves on the screen, we can get like a piece of paper to cover it, if that would be better for anybody.
Yes, please. Are you able to maybe turn the brightness all the way down, and then we'll just speak on this side?
I can just go here. Yeah, that should be better. Yeah. Yeah, the stream has started. Without further ado, I invite the first speaker of the affirmative team to stand and begin the debate.
The future is bright, much brighter than the dark times that we are currently living in. Firstly, in this speech, I'm going to my first point around why the world at the moment is not great for the majority of people, and onto my second point, which is why it is much more likely to be better in the future. So, and my setup will be integrated throughout my speech. On to my first point. A bit of context here is that there are highs and lows in the world throughout history. We have seen this is clear. We are now about to enter a very foreseeable low, and that sucks. So why is this true? Firstly, there is a wave of political leaders across the globe that are strongly far right. This looks like Donald Trump in America, Giorgia Meloni in Italy, and importantly, it is likely that you are born into a world where you are a minority in some form, whether this is through race, or through gender, or through sexuality, or having a disability. You are very likely to be in this minority and therefore attacked by the policies that these leaders are putting in place, making you extremely vulnerable to these policies, these leaders, and they attack who you are at your core, and we see this as really harmful because it is actually who you are as a person, and the effects of this are really detrimental. Secondly, currently there is a lot of high military tensions that puts a lot of people at risk for a multitude of reasons. Look at Ukraine, look at Palestine, look at Congo. Because of this, there is currently a lot of military tension, but there is also a high risk for military there's also a high risk of military risks in the near future as a result of these unhinged political leaders. So, what are the outcomes of this? Firstly, having political leaders' policies deeply affects these minorities that the policies actually attack. This puts your well-being immediately at risk, not just on a physical level, but you also the fact that you could just be bombed, which is a possibility, but also in terms of the mentality that I've talked to you about, that you're attacking who you are, and because you are not accepted into society, you are actually being actively oppressed in this society, which is really harmful. If you do not feel like you can fit in, you do not feel like you can be yourself, think about this person, think about how upsetting and how harmful this is to be that person in this world. I wouldn't wish this on anyone. In terms of being that person, yes, wouldn't wish it on anyone, as it is who isn't in a very privileged position that we are to be born into the world today. Secondly, on impacts of these military tensions, it literally if you are born into these effects, will impact you for the rest of your life. I think it's very important to note this. It's not just a one-time thing. This affects your whole life, whether it is because your leg has been blown off because of these military engagements, or if you're being malnourished in Gaza, or not having access to the education or basic necessities, or being able to express yourself. These have long-lasting life effects. We are thinking about the life of this person being born into the world. We do not want them to have to deal with all of these harms. So why is this so important? It's important because these very significant harms that I've told you about are impacting the majority of the population, because in the majority you fit into a minority, all of those that I've explained. I will take your POI now.
Kate, do you acknowledge that when a minority leader makes a change in a world that is stalwartly against them, it is so much more powerful than anything else?
Yes, and I'm about to get onto that. Thank you for leading me into it, because I'm going to be telling you why it is so much more likely to be better in the future, and that these impacts will not actually, and we'll get so many more benefits in the future because of how things will be changing and the progression that we have currently seen leading up to now. Bit of context here, to quote Martin Luther King, the arc of history bends towards justice. So why is this true? In terms of political leaders, on a global scale, we are able to see the huge harms that these far-right leaders are having and will have at the moment. This means that in the future, people are much less likely to vote people like this in, or people who share these similar views. If I am seeing somebody who's creating all of these harms, who is leading us into potentially a world war, if we are seeing all of this, we are seeing that this is very, very harmful, and we're not going to go, cool, let's vote in the same person who's exactly like this, let's do that all over again. No, we're going to vote in someone who's not like this. We're not going to be voting in these far-right political leaders who are having these really detrimental effects to the majority of the population. We see this as really harmful, and it's kind of common sense that we're not going to do this again, which means that we are limiting the harms of this significantly, and that is really important because this will be changing in the next 100 years, and that is a unique thing to us. Secondly, on the economy. We are reaching a stage where there are more and more people rapidly approaching the vast majority that are struggling to find places to live. As there becomes more and more people, you now have the potential to have this majority voting for policies that will increase the amount of money that people are receiving. And crucially, people are willing to take more and more drastic movements and drastic actions to ensure this, which means that a socially conservative voter, for example, will now prioritise being able to live over wokeism. This means that when you reach this tipping point, you see governments doing things like extreme wealth distribution, which benefits the majority of people in 21-25. This is really important because we are likely to be born into this majority, which is why we would much prefer to be born in 21-25. Thirdly, people are more likely to be inclusive to all of in terms of a social society way of looking at things. Because people learn more and more about other perspectives, and this builds an interconnected society, because when you hear more about these people and when you hear more about their perspectives and shared experiences, you actually build an understanding, you gain appreciation for these people and for what they have gone through. This makes you more exciting. We have seen this. We have seen that people have become more aware of these issues. We have seen this will continue to rise, continue to get better through this through the scale of progression, and because people know more about the harms and the discriminations that people are facing because it's been more seen. This is a result of lived and shared experiences becoming more and more open over time. So what are the outcomes of this? Firstly, on the economic outcomes, people realise that they have a power and that they are able to reclaim the economic system, which means that now the vast majority of people get a chance to live and to able to have housing on all these issues that we're currently seeing a huge harm at the moment. On the small scale, it means that they are able to vote in a government that places higher taxes on wealthy people in order to fund tax cuts on the lower and middle class, which are the majority, again, more likely to be born into this, of these middle and lower class income workers. We won't see the benefits in the next 80 years if we are able to be born, if we are born now, because it takes time to vote and it takes time for these policies to be put in place, which is why we want to be born in 100 years, where we will have this better economy to support us and the vast majority. This is because it's really important to have this for everybody in this situation. And secondly, being more inclusive in this society means it's better suited to the individual's needs, because that's what a general more inclusive society means. This is extremely beneficial for the individual because we see these things as things that people as who they are. This is who people are these things, and this means that you can be accepted as yourself. And we see this as a constant development without current political leaders following this increasingly inclusive trend. 21-25 is going to be a way better place to be who you are and who you want to be. So by the end of this speech, what have I told you? I have told you that through political, military, economical and social ways, we will see a much better world in 100 years, which is why we want to be born then. Thank you.
I thank the first affirmative speaker for their speech, and I invite the first negating speaker to stand and deliver their speech.
Bruno Mars once said that if the world was ending, I'd want to be next to you. On side deck, we'd want to be one of the scientists that stopped the end of the world from happening in the first place. 4 things I'll be doing for you in my speech today. Firstly, I'll be providing some setup about what we think this world and this debate's going to be fought over. Secondly, I'll be providing some sort of rebuttal, and then I'll be moving on to my 2 substantive points. One, on why we believe that the future is uncertain and how we shouldn't be taking this gamble, and then secondly, about how we don't have any agency or any control over that future and the world we're living in under side F. But let's start off with some setup. So, what do we think the world now looks like? First of all, we categorize it as being in a turning point, right? We believe that currently it's relatively good, and I'll get onto more of this later, but we have unparalleled opportunities relative to the rest of history. But we also believe there are a lot of threats that are currently facing our world. Climate change, conflict, etc. The list goes on. We also believe that in this world we have an agency to make change. And I'll flesh this out again a bit more later when I get to the point. But we believe that, again, we have opportunity. We have democratic processes. Most of us have, again, relatively best education in the world and healthcare. And we also believe there's like historical impetus and there's historical context. That means that we believe that people can step forward and make changes in the world. People like Malala, people like Alexander Fleming, people like Churchill, right? Great people in history stepping up. And what does the future look like? We see there are 2 outcomes that the future has. One in which there's a good outcome in the future where we all sort it out, or there's a bad one in which we get to like a dystopian, worse off society. So what does that mean we want? Again, we want the best possible future. What does the best possible future look like? We want one in which we get the best things for everyone we can, but also one in which we get to live through and enjoy those benefits. And we're going to win this debate in one of 2 ways. One in which we reduce the chances of living in a bad dystopian society so that we get to like live and enjoy these benefits, and another one in which we are able to have that agency, have that ability to have that control to get this to get the best things out of this world. Some quick points of rebuttal to do. So we hear this general push from the outside that we're entering currently a low period. Now, why do we not believe this is the case? And these are going to have very bad benefits, very bad things for us. Why do we not believe this is the case? First of all, we believe that, again, as I said, we live in a relatively good world. We have unparalleled opportunities. We are in a democratic position. It means we are in a democratic position almost around the world, and we have these opportunities. And we believe we have like an unprecedented opportunity to fight back and to like change the tide of history, to change the way these low periods are going. And again, we'll get on to why we believe we're not going to get out of this low period, even if you believe that's true. And we also get this push that the world's going to get better. Firstly, we believe there are going to be irreversible impacts of things like climate change that you can't like change in the future. But we also believe that there are going to be cycles of this, that even if the world is going to get better, the far rate's going to return in like 80 years or so. And again, I'll also have some integrated rebuttal into why we don't believe this is the case. So on to my first point about how the world we live in is going to be uncertain. Some context for this point is like the world we live in now is one, again, it's a turning point. A lot of polarization, a lot of conflict, a lot of climate change issues that need to happen, and we believe it could be good and maybe bad, right? Depending on what we do now to solve it. We're going to prove in this point that the world is most likely to be substantially worse off than what it's going to be now, and it's going to, again, be really, really bad. How do we prove this? Firstly, we believe that people are like inherently short-termist, right? People care about your lives now. It's like an evolutionary thing that you hold, like in order to survive, you need to be like focus on the day-to-day things that you were doing in order to get by. And also you just want to live a better life because again, you don't care what's happening in like 100, 200 years time. You want to get the best things now. So you do things to maximize your life now. You're not really focusing on sustainable things. You're willing to use fossil fuels if you get more energy, if you get more power in the things that you're doing. You're willing to use non-reusable things, again, if you do things. You're willing to vote for parties that give you better things now, do more things in the short term for you, and you're willing to support people, again, that give you more things now, and which don't care about the future. I'll take that POI.
To what degree of certainty are Palestinians currently getting bombed in Gaza?
Well, of course, there is that point, but we believe, again, ultimately, we're going to live into a world in which we're going to get substantially worse things, in which that dystopian society is going to be paralleled and like given out to the entire reasons. So again, what is the outcome of this this proof? Is that when we get like things like climate change, we get things like utilizing resources now, which in 100 years' time, we will not be able to use if we were born in that period of time, because everyone's just going to keep on using them up now. So that means that we're going to live in an actively worse off future. and we believe there's a really high chance of getting that worst future for us. What does this mean? It means, again, first of all, we have no control on that happening, but also we don't enjoy any of those benefits. We're talking about us being selfish. We don't enjoy any of the benefits we could have if we're just going to end up in this really bad world anyway. Second way we prove this is, again, we just believe there are existential threats that are threatening us now. Climate change, conflict like India, Pakistan, where we have nuclear powers going head-to-head locking horns. We have AI, which could go either way. Again, we believe that these could be really bad things in the future. Any of these things could spiral off and go bad in the future, and we have no way on the side of stopping these things from happening because we're not there to do anything about it. We're putting all our hands in people making decisions now, here and now, into doing this. We believe, again, terrible outcomes are going to come from these. There's potential terrible outcomes be coming from this, and we believe we're going to be living in that world. And again, we're not getting benefits from living in the now. We're just going to end up living in a worse off world. Thirdly, we believe that, again, there's always the chance of bad actors and we have no clue and no control over them happening. People could be born into hardship, they could think they're right, and they come up with extremist ideas and extremist solutions. We believe that could present themselves to the world during this 100-year gap if you're comparing the chances of what we have now to what we have in the future. These people are going to do bad things. People like Hitler, people like Putin. We cannot predict these things from happening. They're going to come forward with ideas to the world, and they're going to enact these things, and they're going to have terrible outcomes and impacts with their actions on the world that we'll be living in, the world we'll be born into in 100 years' time. We believe there's a big chance of this happening, and there's things we can't predict. So ultimately, again, we're going to believe that we have no agency to stop these things from happening, and ultimately, we're not going to be enjoying any benefits that we currently get in the world, because again, we believe the world as it is currently good. Why is this important? Because we believe that we weigh up the two things. We have the certainty of enjoying a relatively good future compared to the rest of history, relatively good present compared to the rest of history now, versus the chance that we have in the future, which I've just explained to you, is actually really, really bad and is going to be like this dystopian, terrible society. We believe that we should always take that chance of having the certainty of enjoying a life now. And even if the world may be good in the future, we don't believe it is worth that risk of taking it if we're having this decision of being born now or in 100 years' time. And on to my second point about how we have limited agency and we have limited control now. Context for this, again, we have we believe we live in a turning point, and there's also historical precedent of people standing up and making big change. And we'll prove to you that we get to enjoy and have the benefits if we have agency, we have control over what we do. 3 ways we prove this. First of all, again, we believe we have opportunities, education, healthcare, democracy, all these things I've explained to you, which we relatively have never had access to in the rest of the world. What does it mean we have? It means we have ways to engage in these problems that we are facing currently, as AF is characterized for us. And we believe we have opportunity to engage in them, to get out there and vote, to actually make a change, and to decide for ourselves what the future could be for us. We believe that we're going to make the world better because of this. What are the outcomes of this? It means when you look at it all on a scale, we have that guarantee, we have that immediate control over what the future we're having is, what the current present we're having, what the benefits we're having are. And again, we have those benefits as well, those benefits of making it, and we're going to be able to experience those. And then secondly, we believe there's always the chance of small change happening in the things we're doing to be able to make the world just a slightly better place in the future. We do not believe the AF side has this. They're putting all their hands in just an uncertain period of 100 years. Ultimately, that is why we can compare those chances. We believe that the moot must fall.
I thank the first negating speaker for their speech, and I invite the second affirming speaker to stand and deliver their speech.
things to do in this speech. Firstly, looking at what the world currently looks like, and secondly, what it will look like into the future. Firstly, on what the world currently looks like. We get a line at first negating that currently the world is really democratic, and that's really great. I think 2 reasons why this doesn't hit the mark. Firstly, this isn't everyone, right? So sure, the people we interact with in privileged New Zealand is democratic, but there are a large amount of people in places where they either A, have no democracy, live under a dictatorship, such as Russia, which is a large quantity of people, or B, have a partial democracy where they might have some elements, but there's high rates of corruption, which means people can't fully express their will. But secondly, I think this is rapidly backsliding, right? Look at countries like America that used to be democratic institutions, but now are ignoring things like court rulings, and now ignoring things like the Constitution, which rapidly means they have the capacity to lose their democratic status. So obviously that means that within the 100 years, even in their best case, where now we ignore all of the other countries where democracy is bad, you still have a case where within a very proximate, in the kind of next 20 years, you are likely to see these harms. The next push, and I think this is where the heart of their case lies, given they spent like 7 minutes of their speech on it, is that you can enjoy the short-term things. 3 responses here. Firstly, I think the important thing to note here is that you are born now, and so I think it's nonsensical to say, well, you can enjoy fossil fuels, because you're 2 years old, right? Obviously there is very little capacity to be able to engage in those things. But I think secondly, where people are currently beginning to pivot, right? And importantly, it is those who are the most vulnerable that have to bear the brunt of this, because when we have things like pivots towards renewables, that means that there might be some people that lose their jobs, but importantly though, it is the rich pricks like Elon Musk that are still benefiting, and not here just on scale, like there is hundreds of thousands of workers that are going to immediately face this harm, compared to like one Elon Musk, like a couple of oligarchs which do quite well. And I think thirdly, as I've stated, this only helps the privileged, right? Because not many people benefit from these things, from the nature of them being like profit driven as to why these crises occur, right? Sure, like coal production might be insanely profitable, but it's not profitable for the worker that's getting lung cancer in a coal mine. It's profitable for Gina Reinhardt, who's able to buy her 3rd jet, right? I think that those in Kiribati don't really care about whether coal is really good at the point in time that they're getting flooded. I think that most people can't access those benefits. And so importantly, even if they prove benefits, and I think especially their benefits are low when we kind of are at that turning point. And that turning point is crucial because it means that we are still having the harms of climate change because of what has retrospectively been done. But we don't get the benefits of coal or benefits of fossil fuel. So even if there were benefits, and even if those did help most people, they're not benefits that currently accrue now or will happen in the next 100 years, especially when this person is an adult, which is like 20 years down the track. But on climate change, I think there's a few reasons why I think we actually get better positioned to fight against climate change. Note here though this debate takes place in 2025, and I think firstly there are strong incentives to solve this, right? Because currently climate change is not as proximate. I think it isn't affecting the powerful people, because A, I think people can't make profit when their natural resources are destroyed, but B, you are not at the point in time that climate change reduces consumers' ability to live or whatever. There's no one to purchase their products, right? Which I think that looks like the government rapidly putting resources toward action, and and that means that people are likely to fix it into the future. But I think secondly, the people that are going to die because of climate change are those that are going to die within the next century, right? I think A, because it is happening so quickly, but B, because you have more information there. Because in our side, even if climate change is bad, you can see the patterns of flooding, right? Where there are firework risks, and you can actively avoid these things. And importantly, for example, if you're on an island that's about to get flooded like Tuvalu, you're going to die within the next 100 years. So obviously, you won't have kids which will then be born. And so importantly, what that means is that you therefore are born probably in a place which has been which has been able to survive climate change at the point in time you are born in the first place. That is logically prior. But thirdly, I think we have the capacity to reverse it on their side, on our side of the house. Do things like carbon technology, do things like mass sea kelp. But I think A, you need the time for this tech to be developed, but B, you need for climate change to be able to physically be seen as manifested for this change to occur, which means, and not that these things do take time. So I think in 100 years' time, like either one of two things is true at the end of this. Either A, we've been able to adapt to it. I think that what this looks like is maybe in our worst case, you have to do things like frequently move, like to escape fires. Maybe you have to but importantly, you are used to that because society has had a 40-year window to get used to that being the norm. And so importantly, at the end of this, I think we are better positioned to live in this world because the harms that happen are solved before you are born in the first place. Right. Just finally, before I move on from now, I'd like to weigh Kate's content about why now sucks. Because this is the only certain element of this debate, right? The rest is speculative, like 6 debaters in a room going, maybe this will happen. But we know for certain that now is awful. And crucially, for the most vulnerable, there is no capacity for it to be worse, right? For the Uyghurs in concentration camps, it cannot get worse. For the women in the Taliban, there is nowhere for them to fall. And even if this is only slightly, which I think is rapidly increasing in its scale, I think the fact, even if there is a small chance that these people do that, the depth of impact where you spend an entire life in a concentration camp is obviously debate winning. Right, on what is likely to happen in the future. The first thing we hear is that there is no agency for these people to change. But I think firstly, you are only one individual, and it's unclear why that you yourself are able to stop climate change. I think the reason we know this is true is one person hasn't stopped climate change thus far, right? And importantly, you're right, but secondly, it's just unclear why your capacity as an individual changed. Because even operating on that unmet analysis of one individual can do this, then it's probably quite clear that one individual could do this in 100 years, right? It's unclear why that changes. But even if you do have the capacity to do this, I think there is a crushing pressure of having to save all of Earth, the burden of being the sole person which can save all of humanity, which I think leads to not being able to do it, leads to a miserable life. And no, this isn't actors' debate. So I don't think you probably do care about world-saving benefit at the point in time you live every day of your life miserable and stressed. The final thing they kind of push here is that the far right is going to return. But I think that the harms are proximate enough not to happen. Because in the aftermath of World War II, when the West was able to see the horrors of the Nazi regime, governments put mechanisms in place to stop it from happening again because they were so scarred. Those mechanisms are only proximate enough on their side of the house when the harms which are about to accrue are able to be seen. Their side stands for a speculative world, which probably looks worse. We are against the certain harms on their side of the house.
I thank the second defining speaker for their speech, and I invite the second negating speaker to stand and to deliver their speech.
The affirmative team would like you to believe that we only like our world because we are privileged. I would agree that we are privileged. We are privileged to live in a time where polio doesn't exist. We are privileged to live in a time where we don't have to scrimp and save so that we only starve when we're 30 instead of 20. We are privileged to not live in a peasant serfdom. We are privileged to live in the modern society we have because relative to the entire history of the human race, never before have rights been this equal. Never before have groups had this many opportunities. Never before have we had a better world. This is simply true. All right, let's get on to 3 main points for you in this debate. First of all, what does the world look like now? Second of all, what happens if you're born in bad circumstances? And third of all, what should we do to make a better future? First of all, let's look at what does the world look like now. Okay, so they've just told you that sort of the world sucks. They've cited a lot of examples of people who are living in disadvantaged situations. Note that these situations are either could be worse or non-exclusive. For example, in a future where we are living, as they said, moving all the time because of climate change, we are stressed, we are probably going to be a lot more exposed to 1, diseases, but 2, bad actors and authoritarian societies, which means we have more concentration camps as we fight for resources and fight for space, and we have more genocides. There's no reason that people who would be put in concentration camps are better off on their side of the house 100 years into a hellscape future. Second of all, we hear that that change can only be made in the future. Not only does this go against their own argument that, we can only do things once we're 20 years older, okay, so we'll make the change in 20 years. But also we see the fact that change really can't be made on these issues that we know about, that we know we need to solve now, 100 years into the future. Why? Because issues like climate change will be too far entrenched. You can't cool the globe like 10 degrees. You can't undo the flooding of millions of homes, the death of billions. You can't simply wish that away because it's been 100 years. Second of all, we see that we actually must stand against the world in this backward slide. They tell you how the world's going downhill, how we've got a large amount of the right. Okay, so we need to stand against it. We need to be the one voice that stands up. I'm going to explain to you more why this is important in my third point. But fundamentally, this is something we can do now that mitigates what they think about the world. Finally, they also tell us that in 100 years, the far right will have completely disappeared. And then they themselves bring up the example of the massive world war that was fought against the far right 80 years ago. And they tell us they're back. So it sounds like in around 100 years, the far right has not only returned... Yeah, sure.
You say the world has never before looked this good. Why do you think it's so good, ignoring all the bad stuff you're ignoring? Do you think it's because of this trend of increasing benefits that we've told you about? Therefore, do you think it'll be even better in 100 years?
Okay, so you tell us there's a trend of increasing benefits, and then you tell us the world's going backwards. 1, that's a contradiction. 2, that trend of increasing benefits looks like the actions of individuals, so it can only get better when this house stands up and tries to make a change. And 3, things are getting better now, but things are also have a lot of chance to get worse. In history, as they've told you, there have been cycles where things have started to get better and then started to get worse. We're currently at almost the peak of a very happy cycle, and we would like to remain that way, or at least fight for not losing it, rather than simply hoping that we'll roll the cosmic dice and come out on the positive side of the future, because that is an insane gamble to take with your own life. Alright, so now let's get on to the idea that they give you, the very weak idea, by the way, of what about people who are born in bad places. Not only is this a lot more people 100 years into the future because of irreversible issues like climate change, they themselves conceded that you might be moving all the time, living meal to meal, working really hard. That's simply worse. Also, as we explained, this doesn't affect everyone, and those people are still receiving massive benefits that they are not receiving, 1, in the past, or 2, in this dangerous future. For example, yes, there is an incredible struggle for people right now in sinking Tuvalu, but they have access to the medication and aid that didn't even exist only 50 or 100 years earlier. This looks like the fact that we can now have antibiotics. This looks like the fact that we now have global institutions that care about these people. This looks like the fact that we are, in some part, doing better than we ever were. So, even for these super disadvantaged people, life is still, at the moment, better than it was. So their entire argument about how minorities really have a tough time now. Yes, it's really sad. It's a terrible thing that minorities have a tough time. In the future, with less resources, with a returning trend of authoritarianism that isn't just going to disappear if we wish it away, they will have an even worse life. And even if they have a life that's like around the same, that's not a gamble we want to take with our lives. We want to stand right now and make change right now. Also, they told us that, these people aren't enjoying the benefits of life now, but they will in the future, even though they're born to survivors. And they said, because you're alive, the world must be great. All the problems must be solved. Or you were born in a cave with acid rain pounding down outside. Or you are the last remnant of humanity living on the peak of the Chilean mountains because everywhere else is underwater. There are a million different ways you could be born. We don't want to take that risk because that's an insane risk when right now we live in, as we've told you, the pinnacle of human achievement and life. All right, finally, let's go on to what we should do. Okay.
What do you think is a higher risk of happening if you're living in acid rain? Either A, you die and can't reproduce, or B, you somehow find another partner to mate with and then a person gets born.
Okay, so you're saying that when the world gets bad, it's instantly going to be the elimination of the human race. I think we're better than that. I think we have the indomitable human spirit. I think we will survive for a length of time that allows us to still be around, right? Just because the world is going to be worse in the future doesn't mean we're going to completely be eradicated. It can still be worse even if people are still getting born. That is simply a ridiculous argument. Sense check that. We can still be around even if the world is getting worse. We were still around hundreds of years ago when the world was worse, right? Okay, finally, what should we do? They tell us about all the issues in the world. They tell us about all the struggles people face. What they don't tell us is what we should do about it. What they don't tell us is a path to how we make it better. We, on the negating side, cannot stand for the self-interested attitude that they would like this house to adopt. We want to be the person that stands and says no. Even if we're just one more vote for a better future, one hope, one voice calling out these issues, we are going to get change done. And as we've told you, we've never before had such institutions that allow us to make change. The institutions of democracy, journalists that travel around the world and talk to everyone, not just the advantaged. We have a moment to become that voice, to champion the minority that we make up and make life better for them, to stand against the cycle of history and say, no, this is not good enough. We care more than just ignoring this problem and running away and rolling the dice on getting a good future. Why do we see that this is an incredibly important point in this debate? We see that not only can individuals like Alexander Fleming, who discovered penicillin, like the leaders of the free world, make massive impact on history, but also just having more people bringing attention to issues makes it more likely that we're going to solve them, makes it more likely that we're not going to end up in a hellscape world rather than rolling the dice and running away. It is incredibly important that we stand against the massive issues they tell you about. It's incredibly important that this house says that no, this is not good enough. We must stand for a better world, and we stay around and we fight.
I thank the second negating speaker for their speech, and I invite the third affirming speaker to stand and deliver their speech.
Neig lost this debate when they deemed the world currently totally fine and a great and certain place for people to grow up in. They said it's speculative and we have given you certain harms and told you why it's going to get better. It's not our fault you're not addressing our content. A couple of main points of clash in this debate. First of all, what living now looks like, and then secondly, what the future will look like. Some important characterization and framing here of what 100 years of time is going to look like and what the life you're going to be born in is going likely to look like. What's going to happen in 100 years of time? First of all, there's going to be a massive crash, and then there's going to be a build-up. We told you that change itself takes a long time to happen, especially to like the degree it needs to like get the benefits that we told you. Our benefits take time, so you can't claim them on their side because they're thinking short-term. Also, we tell you that you're likely to be born into a life that is like harmful in like their world, right? Because it's likely that you're going to be born into like some sort of minority that is like really badly affected, which is why all our harms stand. We win this debate if we prove that the world currently sucks and would not be ideal for the majority of people to be born into, and that the likelihood that like, being born in 100 years would be much better, so that's how we win the debate. Also, we tell you that if you believe their benefits, you have to believe ours too, because of the fact that they've told you that like their benefits come from the fact that the world is going to change and like get so much better because it's like now is the perfect time to make change. So obviously if the world is going to like get better on their side, it's going to get better on our side because it like exponentially gets better over time. So we are winning on their own metrics.
What?
Okay, the first main point of clash, what living now looks like. They told you that the world now is at like a turning point, so it's the best time to make change. A couple of responses to this. Yes, the world is at a turning point, but one thing we know about history is that things are going to get worse before they get better. So being born at this time is not ideal. Being born in a time of like extreme change and extreme like turnover is like not ideal. It was much more ideal to be born into like the world after this, when change has been enacted and the world is like obviously like preferable because all the benefits have actually happened and are actually solid. They also claim that like people are short-term thinkers, so why don't they just like use fossil fuels and etc. to like make use of the current world? Okay, first of all, we told you this is unrealistic for like the age. Obviously you're being born now, so like by the time it gets to the point like where you can use these fossil fuels, we tell you that the world is going to be an even shittier place. Also, we tell you that like using fossil fuels doesn't change the fact that like you have bad politicians and all these harms that we've brought you. They can't be ignored just because you're like trying to like make use of all like the things that the world is happening before it like literally implodes. Thirdly, this short-term thinking means that they can't claim any of our benefits because they're too short-term to address the harms, right? If they're short-term, they're not going to be thinking about climate change. They're not going to be thinking about their political leaders because they're supposedly short-term, so this is not a big issue to them and they're not incentivized to change it. However, in our world, where we have more time for people to become less short-term thinkers, realize that they have to like make change here, make this change, and then this change is enacted, it is much more preferable to be living in this world. They also told you that like now we live in a relatively good world and the world right now is the best it will be. This is so untrue for all the reasons we've told you. We've told you that it's like not good for the majority of people because of like political leaders, because of the way that like things are declining and it's going into a trough. You can't ignore all this material that we've brought about how the world looks and how it is like not a good place and just say that it's a relatively good world and it's the best it's going to be, so like why don't we make all these changes now? This is not realistic, which is why we win that point of clash, because we've told you what living now realistically looks like and our world is actually going to look so much better. Secondly, on what the future looks like. They've told you that it's going to like look like a dystopia. We've told you that it's not going to look like a dystopia because we've told you about like what the arc of history means and like how the world is going to like create better change. We've told you that like the world currently, your world, is far more likely to be dystopian because it's entering like a really like dark time at the moment. The world right now, we've told you, is actually not great. So it's far more likely to look like a dystopia than our world. We've actually managed to sit through all the benefits that you want to claim to their fullness and living in a better world. Our world is so much more likely to like be better than your current dystopia. They also claimed that it's like not worth the risk and like putting the world in someone else's hands is like really bad. Their world is equally as risky, if not more so, right? Because we tell you that they're entering like a really dark time and it's really like stupid of them to like think that this is not going to be like risky to live in, right? They can't ignore all these things that we've told you are going to happen in their very near future and then just say that, oh, we'd actually prefer to like live in this world because it's a little bit more certain than your world. This means that they're actually like they're sacrificing this amazing future that they can have to live in a world that like maybe is a little bit more certain, but is like certainly more awful, right? Also, they claimed that it's like, they told you that like, there's like also we told you this trend of increasing benefits means that our world is going to like significantly get better over time, and any benefits that they claim are going to like obviously get better over time, meaning that our world, which is like further on in time, is obviously going to be better. Thirdly, they made like a massive contradiction when they said that their world was so likely to become amazing and then that ours was so likely to become worse. They can't both be true, because if your world is going to become amazing in the near future and like you've got all this like great change that you're making and all these people who are like trying to like change the scope of history and change the future of the world, this means that this carries on, right? If you want to claim these benefits, you also have to accept that these benefits carry on into our world and then are better on our world, which means that our world is actually more preferable, and so we're winning on your own metrics here on that massive contradiction that you just made. What points of ours have they not responded to? They haven't responded to our points about the fact that we have problematical political leaders and all these harms that we've brought you. They basically ignored all of our harms and told you that their world is going to be great because they'll just take advantage of the fact that it's totally declining and use all these resources. They haven't addressed any of our content about how you're likely to be born into a world where you're massively affected by these political leaders or military tensions or all these other harms, and it causes extensive impacts your mental health, your education, your lifestyle, your home, and your economy. They haven't responded to the fact, and this means that obviously all their harms still stand because they haven't responded to them, and we've still got better benefits than them. So we're already winning by an absolute landslide. They also didn't respond to our points about how the future is going to be better. They didn't accept the fact that obviously if they're going to claim these benefits, they're going to get better over time, which means again that we're winning on their own metrics. A couple of weighing of our points. First of all, our point on why now sucks. If now sucks, this proves how much better it could be. So this weighs highly because it means that the world that Ned prefers is absolutely horrendous. So it's not very difficult for us to prove that ours is going to be better than theirs if theirs sucks so much. Secondly, on the point of why the future is better. We told you that the future is not as speculative as Ned would have you believe, because our benefits at worst are symmetrically speculative to better because their world is just as speculative, and at best is so much better than their world. Even if the future is marginally better, that still makes it preferable. And because we've proved that theirs sucks so much and that ours is far, far better, we will win this debate. We've told you that we've won both points of passion because we've proved that what living now looks like is really awful and the future is going to be far, far better. We've had a more accurate characterization and framing because we've told you that what's going to happen over 100 years of time is more realistic than what they believe is going to happen, and that realistically what world you're going to be born into and what being born into this world actually looks like is far, far better. So therefore we win this debate.
I thank the third speaker of the affirmative team for their speech, and I invite the third speaker of the negating team to stand and deliver their speech.
If you believe anything that Orla told you about how everything in this debate is speculative, then you can agree with me when I say the only certainty we have is the need for change. So we win when we prove that on our side of the house, we are able to enact this change, and we are able to create a better world for us. Okay, so on that, 2 paths to victory today. Firstly, if we can prove any kind of marginal chance of the future being worse than the present, because this means that it's better to be born now with the opportunity to make it better, versus on side F where we leave it in the hands of other people, or even if you don't buy that, we just kind of have a better life because the now is better than the future. Or secondly, if you believe that we have more agency to create change, this means that even if you believe that they're going to be living in a really good world in 100 years, we are the people that create that good. We are the scientists, engineers, teachers who make that change. And if you believe us when we say that their world is bad, we're able to do as much as we can to prevent that happening. And basically just have human agency, and we think that's a good thing. Okay, 3 things to get through today. What does the future look like? What ability do we have to make change? And before I get into any of that, what our life looks like currently. Okay, so we hear this really strong push from them that things are going to get worse before it gets better. And they tell us all about how terrible the world looks today. We have all these far-right politicians. We have all these people who are like using up our fossil fuels, who are basically just going to make it impossible for any good to happen. Okay, well, we think that when they tell you all of this, they are proving that we are trending towards an incredibly bad future, right? This means that in 100 years, when we have brought all these far-right people into office, when we have burned all these fossil fuels, it is the effects of those fossil fuels that are going to be impacting us in 100 years. I think they're underestimating the longevity of the harms of the things that are happening today. Even if you believe them when they tell you that today's world sucks because people are burning fossil fuels, because we have all these far-right politicians, then you have to believe me when I tell you that the impacts of this are going to last 100 years. When the glaciers that are melting now are going to impact them in 100 years when they fully melted and like half the world is under the ocean, we think that the world is going to look so much worse for them to live in, and they've completely ignored all of this. Okay, so what does our life look like today then? We think that we believe Michael, who I believe is pretty convincing, when he tells us that people have like better lives today than they ever have before. We see that like as much as we have all this conflict, and we do accept when they tell us that, we think that we also have like unlimited access for some people to education. We have this ability to make change. We have people who do care about social justice movements, etc. So what does this mean for us? This means that we are likely to have a good life. Now they've told us that we didn't respond to what they said about being a minority. I'm going to get into that when I talk about what ability we have to make change. Okay, but next onto this future, I think they have approached the future very naively, even when you aren't thinking about the longevity of impacts that I've just been into. If you think about the way that they've told us that the future is trending towards justice, we think that this just isn't true. When they say that we won't vote bad people in, when they say that more people gives us more majority votes, when they say that we're basically just going to have a better economy, we cannot buy any of this. Why? Because we think that people like Trump are more likely to be voted in when they see that terrible things are happening in the world, when they want change. So we think that if anything, when they say that people won't vote bad people in, they're actually completely wrong. We think that they're more likely to vote bad people in when we have all of these existential issues that we're having to deal with. And so that's kind of just a naive way to approach it. When they tell us that more people equals more majority votes, well, we think that more people means more people to vote for Trump, because people are kind of just selfish and they're short-term thinkers, as we told you at James, which means that we're on either side equally likely to become more of an oppressed minority. And then all of this stuff on how they're more likely to become inclusive, how they're going to gain appreciation, we think that this could easily be countered by saying if you're a minority, you're more likely to be scapegoated or blamed for the negative things that have happened. And I really don't want to give up semi-specific examples, but I think we all know intuitively. Okay, so when we disagree with this trend, what do we have on our side of the world? We have the ability to make our own change. Okay, so what does this look like? When we say that we have the ability to make change, we want to bring up all these individual examples because they claim to us that individuals somehow have no ability to make change. And then they give us a quote from Martin Luther King. Guys, be so for real with me right now. Okay, and then we have all these people like Nelson Mandela, like Malala, all of these singular names of singular individuals who create so much change. This is why I think it is actually a more powerful thing if you buy the fact that we are born as a minority, because as a minority, we have so much more opportunity to create positive change in our world. Even if we are impacted by all of these things, if we have our identity challenge, we think that it's actually a better thing because it means that we are one of those people who can create the change that the world needs. And that is just an absolute benefit. Yes, I'll take a point now.
Sorry, you talk about climate change and then you say that Donald Trump will be voted to make these important changes. Are you saying that Donald Trump cares about climate change?
Oh my gosh, that's exactly the point that I'm making. Donald Trump doesn't care at all about climate change. But when people believe Donald Trump, when he comes in with this insane rhetoric about how white people in South Africa are being genocided, and then people believe him, then we think that's an issue, right? When we're voting in people like Trump who aren't going to do anything about climate change, and you buy their mechanisms about how Elon Musk is the person who is going to be reaping the rewards of all this, then we know on our side that we know on their side that things are going to be worse because they are more likely to have these people voted in, because we have those negative outcomes that we see. Now they also have this weird point about like people in places dying off and so you won't be their offspring. Okay, firstly, we think this is just like an inherently selfish argument. We think it's better if we have this ability to make change. It means that we don't have everyone in Tuvalu dying off and so they could be our parents, right? We think that it's just like, not a logical thing for them to have said. We want the best that we can get for humanity, for the most of humanity possible. Okay, so when they tell us that they see like a contradiction in our case, firstly, Orla's a pretty good debater. I think she knows what an even if argument is. So it's not a contradiction, right? When we're saying all of this, it's just saying that like even if you buy what they're saying, then all of our points still stand. So like if we take a step back here and look at what's happening, when they tell us that we're rapidly moving backwards, as they told us at second, we think that it's so likely to be so much worse outcomes-wise on their side of the house. When they tell us that people pivot towards they gave this example of like people pivoting towards renewables and how rich people are going to benefit and poor people are going to suffer. We think that when stuff like that happens, that the impacts go so far into the future that we are going to have a worse world in 100 years. So back to our path to victory. We have proof that the chance of the future being so bad is not even just minimal, it is like marginally more likely. And so we win on that. Even if you don't believe any of that, we've proved that we have more agency to create change, we have more ability to be a Malala or a Nelson Mandela, and that is why the affirming team cannot win.
I thank the third negating speaker for this speech, and as is tradition, I will now reverse the speaking order and invite the negating reply speaker to deliver their speech.
I think when you're given the opportunity between having a world in the short term where you know exactly what's going on, where you believe that relative to all history that has come before, you live in a good world, the best it has gotten so far, and you compare that to the chance we believe which is very, very, very high, as we've told you throughout this case, that the future will become this dystopian society and is far worse than whatever it is now. Even if you believe that the world is bad, as they say, we believe it's going to be far worse in the future. When you weigh up those chances, we believe fundamentally you're always going to choose choose the one in which you get the current situation. There are two ways in which we win this debate, as Lydia has eloquently laid out to you. One is wit, in which we prove to you that the future, that there's a really high chance that the future is going to be worse. And because of this, you are incentivized, us as this house, we are wanting to choose the world in which we do not have that chance of the world being worse. And that, therefore, we're always going to take the certainty that we have in the current term compared to that chance, which we believe to be very, very high, of that dystopia. And then when you weigh that all up, even if you believe there is a chance the world's going to be good, you should not take the risk. And the second point, the second path to victory, is one in which we prove to you that again, even if the current world is bad, and even if you believe the future might be bad, we have that chance we have the agency and we have the ability to actively change the process for the better, so that even in 100 years' time, when we're lying on our deathbed, we have changed the world and we have made it ultimately a better place. And along the way, we have enjoyed slight benefits from that. So those kind of fall into 2 points of class in this debate. One in which, what does the current world look like? And the second one is, what does the future look like? Now let's look at what does the current world look like. And we've heard a lot about how this is going to be really important in this debate because of the certainty. Although I don't believe that is true, because when we believe, we weigh it all up, this is an important point because again, there is certainty in it. So what do we see in the current world? We get a lot of stuff Well, fundamentally, again, we believe, as we've told you down the case, that like we live in the best time in human history, and we get. Because of this democracy, because of these opportunities, because of the education, because of all the healthcare. Now, what do we believe that gives us? We believe that gives us opportunity, right? And we get that, and we believe that opportunity is going to eventually give us like agency and change. And we hear a lot about the current world being a really, really bad place, as it currently is from the F side of the house. Why? Because of far-right leaders, because of minorities, because of tensions, and because of tensions and conflict. And they tell us that change in itself is going to take a lot of time to get over this. How long is it going to take? Well, let's just say something like 50 years, and all the while we're getting these impacts, we're getting these bad impacts coming onto us. Things like climate change. What does that mean? It means like in 100 years' time, one of these impacts are still going to be there. If you believe their case and you believe their push that the current world is bad, the current world is bad and there are a lot of impacts, we believe that ultimately, given their characterization that all this change is taking a lot of time, we believe that these impacts you're still going to be experiencing in 100 years' time. So that is one thing we get from this point, and that is just going to still be worse in the future if you buy all that stuff. Although we do not believe that's happened, that is true because again we've given you all this stuff. But we also believe again we get agency due to these opportunities to make change. That is satisfying one of our paths to victory in which we're able to get in, we're able to solve these problems, and we're able to make change because of that. Now quickly on what does the future look like? We get a lot of this stuff about how people are going to learn from the mistakes of the past, people aren't going to vote in far-right parties, yet in the same sentence they're telling us and giving us the example of Hitler, who again was a far-right man who caused the World War II, right? And then currently in the status quo, he's coming straight back. That proves to us that far-right parties will come back in the future, and it proves that these cycles are going to repeat themselves. We're going to get people like Trump who are always going to buy into this stuff, and that ultimately we don't believe that the world in the future is going to be good. Again, as we were told you down our case, it's in fact going to be bad because people are short-termists because of these existential threats. And ultimately, that is another way in which we win this debate. Because ultimately, when you weigh up the chances, we should always stick with the certainty compared to that risk. And that is why the moon must fall.
Speaking of the speech. Oh, sorry.
No worries. I thank the reply speaker for their speech, and I invite the fellow reply speaker to stand and deliver the final speech of the debate.
Maybe second negating is right, that there is an indomitable human spirit, and that's what will mean that we will get out of this rut, we will collectively work to create a better future. For you to buy their case, you have to buy the end of humanity will occur for, quite obviously, the first time in human history. I think the burden for us is to prove we are able to get out of the rut from the comparatively low point in history we are in. Kate lays this out first, unresponded to, on its own debate winning. 3 things. Firstly, on a clarification. Secondly, comparing the world, on how change affects the future. And then finally, on the comparison of worlds. Firstly, on a clarification, because they try and say this is a contradiction of saying the world can get better, but now it sucks. But they think the way the worlds are getting better is the systemic reasons that Kate gives you at first, about things like the increase in the knowledge and acceptance. And their examples prove this, right? They talk about penicillin, right? Which means that medicines are able to get more research, to develop more, to save more people's lives. But comparatively, how the world is currently bad are unique issues which are specific to a period of time, right? Which have the ability to be stopped, that have the ability to be gotten out of. And I think they deliberately strawmanned our argument there to try and win this debate. And the harm of that is they vastly underresponded to Kate's content, which clearly explained how the world steadily is able to get better in most instances. That alone is debate winning. So even if you don't remember anything else in this debate, that is the easiest way for us to win. But how does the present affect the future? Because I think you need to be able to see the harms to be able to fix them, right? You can see how Trump is screwing you over, and then you are able to vote him out. But importantly, under their side, they have to survive the 20 years of the far right being in the US before people come collectively and solve it, comparatively where we get the lessons of it. And importantly, I think, as I explained to you, it is proximate enough for people to not repeat it into the future. Importantly, I think the indomitable human spirit applies to a populace, but specifically to on an individual level. I think it probably means if you are in a place where you cannot survive, you are unlikely to be able to pass on your genes, you're therefore not birthed into there. Sure, maybe one person survives the acid rain, but that is one person, which when you consider the birth lottery of billions of people, is unlikely. And as Kate tells you, no response. The scale of the present day harms increasing, you reach a critical mass where people take drastic actions. You get class consciousness, where people abandon the wokeism stuff, right, and act in their economic best interests. Right, but on the individual, the odds of you being Malala is ridiculously low, right? Because you don't choose who you're going to be. You're realistically an average Joe, and even if you are Malala, as I tell you at second to no response, it's unclear why you want the stress of this life. The impact is that you were born with problems solved on our side of the house without having to survive the harms of them being solved, survive the harms of the present day. And right, what does the world look like comparatively? I think for places where it is currently good, you see the systemic rise in welfare, as Kate tells you, as all alerts. They could have responded to this, they chose not to. Firstly, on new technology. Secondly, on more knowledge. Thirdly, on acceptance. I think, and all of the reasons they give on why now is good are ones that are able to rise in the future. Their own examples are unstrategic. But in elements of the world which are currently bad, at a base level, they physically can't get worse in the most vulnerable instances I think you should care the most about, right? Because the mere chance of like a horror... The mere chance of maybe the future being bad is not debate winning when it is certain that the world sucks now, right? Try telling the woman living under the regime of the Taliban that maybe it will get worse in the future. There is no capacity for that to do so. I think on our side, you are able to, in our worst case where things suck, you're able to adapt to these global challenges. Because if both sides suck, we break the tie by making people able to cope. They're used to these harms, which means they're more able to action them. So proud to stand on side affirming where we actually help people.
I thank both teams for an excellent debate. I invite them to cross the floor, greet each other how they like, and then... I'll just end the stream. I guess.